Our first speaker on board is Paul Gavazzi, a lead data center architect at Insight. And from the NetApp side, we have Dan Tulledge, a senior technical marketing engineer. Together, these two have prepared a wonderful session today for your eyes and ears. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to our first speaker, Paul, to dive right in. Paul, please take it away.
Thanks for doing that. I really appreciate it. We're going to cover basically data in a hybrid world, and it's going to include not only on-prem but multi-cloud as well as hybrid implementation kind of views of it. We're going to start with presenting the NetApp portfolio of products and solutions that enable cloud implementations relative to a hybrid world. And then we'll follow that up with some security ramifications as well. Zero trust models, things like that. We'd like to begin with a poll. And that poll would be, do you have a hybrid cloud data protection strategy in place? And the reason we're asking this question is, data protection is generally one of the last thing the application developers think about as they move into, cloud-based implementations. So if you could answer that question, I would appreciate it. And Christy, I imagine we wait a minute or two and then go to the next slide?
Correct, and then the next slide will show us everyone's results.
Okay. And that's consistent with what we would expect. Many people don't have a cloud data protection strategy in place. And by data protection, I'm really talking about backup and things like that. Security is what we'll talk about in the next session. So that's consistent with what we're seeing in the industry today and with conversations with many of our customers. Transformation is really the driving factor. Digital transformation is the conversation that generally starts every conversation we have with a client. And it really is forcing the requirements for effective implementations in a hybrid cloud, with the multi-scalers and on-prem, et cetera, et cetera. And we're seeing that our clients are really looking for these factors. Their new applications are coming in. They want to accelerate the response. And that is really provoking a hybrid kind of strategy that needs to be developed. Before I get into the NetApp application or solution portfolio, I'd really like to talk about the way that Insight is organized. Insight is organized around three pillars. One is supply chain optimization. So this is delivering product to our clients, staging product, things like that. The second one is connected workforce. Connected workforce is really BYOD, edge computing, mobile, et cetera. The organization that I work in is cloud and data center transformation. This is the engineering-driven kind of component of the business where we begin to understand. We invest with pre-sales engineering to understand the client's objectives and what the outcome is, and then we begin to develop solutions to satisfy that outcome. And then finally, we have a section of the business which is digital innovation. Digital innovation is really application, microservices, algorithmic processing, things like that, IoT, real time. To give you an idea of what digital innovation does is one example I use is, for certain railroads, they will enable the track telemetry by actually putting an application on a train in the caboose so that they can measure track telemetry and things like that. In COVID, they've developed a solution, that measures people's temperatures before they go into a facility, things like that. So that's what digital innovation does. Cloud and data center transformation, again, my group, what we do is really infrastructure based, and that's the focus of the conversation as we go forward. It will be more around data enablement in a hybrid world. We do this from cloud and data center transformation in the guise of what we call a super solutions integrator. So we have access to all the tier one vendors, and we can build best of breed infrastructures based on what our customer requirements are. But we need to develop those requirements from a perspective of knowledge, right? So we will invest with pre-sales engineers, and we have, many hundred pre-sales engineers who will invest with our clients, understand what your requirements are, and then begin to develop solutions. We have a piece of the business that's operated by the consulting services group, which is more of a strategic engagement. So as you plan a strategy for a hybrid multi-cloud enablement kind of strategy, they will put that together. Then they will be supported by the professional services organization. That is actually the people that build the infrastructures. Then we have a managed services offering as well, that it goes back 25 years or so, that will help implement a managed environment for you if you care to have us manage it. And then finally, we have what we call one-call support, which is basically anytime there's an issue with a solution that we sell, you make one call to us, and then we will arbitrate it between the various vendors and products. Our NPS score is really high in that group. And the other thing that we can do is typically resolve on the first call most of the issues that our clients have. I think about 95% of the time. So that's what cloud and data center transformation does. What I'd like to talk about now is moving into the fact that multi-cloud and multi-platform is driving complexity. And what we're finding is that many of our customers are grappling with the complexity of these deployments. And as you can see from this slide, I mean, it's just look at the vendors on the slide, the various service delivery platforms. I mean, this is a very complex environment. And one of the things that we think drives instability in an infrastructure is complexity. And one of the things that the application or the solution portfolio for cloud enablement of data with NetApp does is simplifies the implementation and addressing of the data, no matter where it may be. One of the things that we've seen, and most of what comes up when I talk to clients today, is really a conversation that revolves around moving from a data center to a center of data. And that has a couple of different aspects to it. One is, location of data. And then that, of course, leads into data gravity, the ability to move large chunks of data around at times. I'm sorry, there must be an advance there. Bear with me just a second. So the point I'm trying to make here is that data is going to exist where it should best exist for things like data gravity, latency, things like that. So what NetApp has done is it's created a perspective of a data fabric. And that data fabric exists not only in on-premise locations, but also in multi-clouds, in enterprises, in edge computing, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the ability to place the data where it makes the most sense for terms of performance, latency, et cetera. So this is a representation, a very high-level representation of the product suite, the solution suite from NetApp. And you can see that it really covers the full gamut of data requirements in a hybrid environment. It begins with, the ability to store the data, then to protect it, to optimize it, to classify it so that it's compliant, to analyze what you're doing with it and how to manage it, and eventually to develop additional applications with things like Project Astra and NetApp Trident, which are microservices-based orchestrators and Kubernetes kind of management platforms. We begin with the store, and the store is really the ability to store data in a hybrid environment targeted at on-prem and as well hyperscalers. And we look at that, we've got basically various options. One is you can go to marketplaces and get volume service. The other is if you want to manage it in the hyperscaler by yourself, essentially having your own filer in the hyperscaler, that is provided through Cloud Volumes ONTAP. The second thing that we offer here, or the next thing we offer, is the ability to do cloud-based backups, either on-prem or in the hyperscalers. And there is a NetApp backup capability that is block-oriented, and we'll talk about that a little later. Next is the ability to optimize the data by either tiering it or syncing it or offering caching capabilities. Beyond that, we have a classification which talks about privacy and the ability to detect ransomware attacks and things like that. And then we go into the ability to manage and organize the data with Cloud Insights. And then finally, as I spoke earlier, the microservices capabilities. So Cloud Volumes ONTAP is basically a filer in the cloud with the well-proven NetApp capabilities for many decades, but offering that in a cloud-based context. So as you can see, you're in your data center. You use the snap mirror technology that can actually interface with ONTAP, as well as allowing the cloud-based applications to interface with ONTAP and store that data in S3 buckets or whatever is required in, sorry, didn't realize that they self-advanced. And then finally, there's a NetApp management suite, which is what we talked about earlier with Insight and Cloud Manager. Cloud Volumes options are the ability, so you can either do this in one of two ways. One is you can manage it yourself with Cloud Volumes ONTAP, or you can go to the marketplace and buy NetApp services that are managed by the hyperscaler, either Azure, Google Cloud, or AWS. So we provide flexibility in how you want to implement. And what we see is many customers will begin with the marketplace and then move to Cloud Volumes ONTAP, which will allow them some granular management capability. Cloud Insights is a product that allows you to manage the environment and affect, because once you get the data in the cloud, the next thing you need to do is make sure that you can effectively manage that data, manage the resources, ensure that you're meeting the SLOs and SLAs. So that's what Cloud Insight does. And then as a more granular, we have NetApp Cloud Manager, which does things like fully automates the backup capabilities. Talking about, okay, so the data is there. We're in a position where we can manage the data. We can report on the data. We can do things like move the data around and report on the data. Bear with me a second. My screensaver's kicking in here. And then finally, we have to protect the data. So what we want to do when we protect the data, is provide a capability that is beyond what is available from basic hyperscaler data protection. So as you can see, the NetApp Cloud Backup Services is a block-oriented data protection scheme. And some of the capabilities of that, and actually one I think is one of the most important, is the ability to protect ransomware. It basically stores, and it's fully encrypted, and it stores the data as a read-only copy. So it uses snap mirror technology. It's incremental forever, and it'll allow you to have a read-only copy of it that can, in effect, allow you to restore from a ransomware attack. So you can see there's a full complement of solutions. Starting from Cloud Volume Services, going to Cloud ONTAP, tiering, compliance, and finally the ability to manage it. The final thing I'd like to talk to you about today is Keystone, NetApp Keystone. So when we talk to many of our clients, they're talking to us about different models of implementing storage. And there is a consumption model that everyone is interested in today, which is the ability to have a cloud-like experience while on premises, but not own the asset. And Keystone allows you to do that. It allows you to do that by selecting a performance tier, selecting your data services. It's available in a block service, a file service, and an object service. and it allows you to manage it, or we can actually manage it for you. So it's a very flexible implementation and allows you to consume data storage the way you want to. So basically, as you grow, you pay for more. There's a commitment. You are charged elastically based on your usage, and we can support implementations and interfaces to any of the major hyperscalers. I wanted to put a representation of what that looks like on there. Basically, what happens is we build an environment. If you want an all-flash environment for performance, a block implementation is based on the E-series. And then finally, we also offer an object store. And what you'll get from a Keystone implementation is a rack based on your requirements. It will be shipped to your environment, implemented in your data center, and can be managed by yourself or be managed by Insight as well as NetApp. So in addition to providing the ability to store data in the cloud flexibly in a data fabric, no matter where the cloud or the data resides, and the ability to protect that data, we also have to secure that data. And Insight has a full security ecosystem, which has full capabilities in terms of implementing security strategies and protocols. And we begin that as well by investing pre-sales engineering and doing things like workshops to better understand what your requirements are. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Dan.
Hey, everybody. As you heard in the beginning, I'm Dan Tulledge, Technical Marketing Engineer with NetApp. So I'd like to begin with a poll. Is your organization currently implementing a zero trust strategy? Give you a little time to answer that. Okay, we got 20% of you implementing a zero trust strategy, which is great. Yeah, and zero trust is a journey, and so it's not something you flick on like a switch. And so I'll talk about what it is. So trust is a human emotion, right? And so we've built the concept of trust into our digital systems. And really, now we have to unwind that concept by implementing zero trust architectures. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So first I'm going to talk about, why we're talking about this, the threat environment. We'll get into what zero trust is, just to level set everybody. And then we'll get into UBA, user behavioral analytics. And then we'll get into specifically about clouds and knowing the shared responsibilities, cloud compliance that Paul touched on as well. And then we'll talk about what are the controls in ONTAP for developing a zero trust architecture. So today, this is the 2020 Verizon's Data Breach and Investigations Report. NetApp tracks this year to year, year over year, and it's also tracked by many CISOs and InfoSec organizations in different organizations. And so this, in the 2020 report, is looking back on 2019. So we saw we had about 32K incidents and 4K breaches. So the incidents were actually down by a third year over year, but the breaches were up 50% year over year. And this is important because the breaches are how the malicious actors monetize their activities. And we can see that 86% of the breaches were financially motivated, and 10% related to espionage, whether it be nation-state espionage or industrial espionage. But a really important piece of information, we've seen this consistently in the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, is that a third of the breaches involved internal actors. And I'll talk about who these internal actors can be. And then we have a number of regulations that have come about, mostly privacy regulations that have come, and it all began kind of with the EU General Data Protection Regulation, but now we've seen many regulations go worldwide, and it helps. It's governing data and personal information. So what's at risk? Well, we can see with GDPR, very big fines are administered for GDPR violations where personal information is not too far. It is propagated in places where people don't want them, and then subjects of GDPR can request that their personal information be deleted using Article 17 of GDPR. And all the privacy regulations have similar sorts of penalties if you violate the rules of those particular regulations. Okay, so I'll jump to it. So let's get into what zero trust actually is. So zero trust is not new. It's been around for over 10 years. It was invented by, or conceptualized by a gentleman named John Kinderbog at Forrester Research. He did all the original terminology about it. And so essentially, we're talking about the old way of building infrastructure is like a castle and moat. And so you were trusted once you crossed the moat, got into the castle, and you could access anything in an organization. So that was the trust but verify, the outside-in approach. But the zero trust approach is verify and never trust. In other words, create these microcores, which is it's a Forrester terminology. Actually, they call it microcore and perimeter at times, MCAPs. And so these microcores are this interior definition of data, services, applications, assets. And so when we're talking about zero trust using ONTAP, we're talking about data-centric zero trust. And so the principles of zero trust are verify explicitly. In other words, you make sure that the access is legitimate, and use least privilege access, which is it's been around for a long time. Use the principle of least privilege, and then always assume breach, and that's related to that insider threat, right? So a third of breaches are from insider threats. So let's get into kind of what zero trust is about. I'm going to try to build this up and to talk about. So we got people that need access to resources. So people use their devices and traverse a network to get to the resources, and then we insert a zero trust policy. The zero trust policy has a context, which is like, what is the information we know about this access, and what's the risk of that, and then based on that context, apply controls to access those resources, and then use intelligence and automation across all of this, because the bad actors are inherently using automation, and so to stay ahead of them, we have to use intelligence and automation. So looking at the scope of what the people are, as you would expect, employees, partners, customers, even robots. Robots are considered people in zero trust architectures. Devices, laptops, desktops, etc. We have Internet of Things devices. A robot could be considered an IoT type device. Then the type of network could be a public network. I'm talking to you today over a public network, a private network, a network within your organization, or a managed network, a managed service provider network. And the resources can be on-prem resources, software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service type resources. And then we begin to verify, and this is the verify, never trust part of zero trust. So we have for the people, what type of roles do these people have? What are the tasks that they normally do? What type of people are they? And then the devices is the device a managed device? Is it owned by a particular corporation or enterprise, or is it a private device? Does the device have an agent on it? Is the software up to date on the device? And is the device secure? And then the network, is it a corporate network? Is it a geographically dispersed network? Is the network known? Is it anonymized? Is it coming from the dark web? Is it a botnet, and is it attacking? This is all information in the verification to understand what the risk is and provide context. And then on the resource side, we have, is it of publisher scope resource? Is it classified, and is it under some regulation? Is it sensitive, or in John Kinderbog's terminology, is it toxic? Because toxic is data you do not want to leave your organization. Is there a version for that resource? And then we apply the context based on the verification that we've done, for the people, devices, and the network. And so, what's the risk of this access? Is there any threat intelligence around this? And is there a typical habit that the people have, that they're out of the regular behavior of the person that gets into user behavioral analytics? And then, is there a regulation that we need to comply to? Is the time of day normal or not normal? Is there an anomaly? And then based on the context, we apply controls. And so we can apply strong authentication. We should probably use strong authentication regardless of the context. And we can do attestation. We can audit the access. And again, we should probably be auditing all of our access. And encrypt in flight or at rest, the data in flight or at rest. Or maybe we just simply accept the terms of the access because the risk is low. But this zero trust policy, as indicated by the circle around the context and control, is constantly being evaluated so we understand the context and apply the proper controls. So with ONTAP, we have on the right-hand side the resources that can be NetApp public and private cloud, and we create this data-centric microcore using the controls of ONTAP. And the controls can, one of the key controls is the use of the storage virtual machine to segment the data management system, whether it be in the public or private cloud. And then we use the FPolicy partner ecosystem to understand the behaviors of users, what's normal behaviors and what are not normal behaviors, and then apply the controls listed across the bottom. And I'll talk more about those controls. So FPolicy is something we call the zero trust engine, right? And so we have our FPolicy partner ecosystem. I mean, one of the partners is NetApp ourselves, with NetApp Cloud Insights, which actually has a component called Cloud Secure, which provides the user behavioral analytics capability. And so the zero trust engine, or FPolicy, is an external server that lives outside of ONTAP, whether it be on-prem or in the cloud, and in very granular events, so like file reads, writes, creates, deletes, attribute changes of files are all observed by the FPolicy server, and then the FPolicy server can take an action if necessary when something abnormal is taking place. There's also a native mode for FPolicy, which are static definitions where you use file extensions that you want to either allow or block based on the file extensions. So in the case of ransomware, some of the early versions of ransomware would actually rename file extensions to, like WannaCry was WNCRY. And so we want to, block those file extensions. But that works good for like known attacks, but for day zero attacks, you need to use the external mode, external FPolicy server. And so then the FPolicy server can take an action if something has gone out of normal behavior. And we should also log to a SIM, so a Security Information Event Management System, something like Splunk. And then we can segment our data management system with ONTAP using the storage virtual machine. So in this example, we're looking at segmentation by company. So this would be like a service provider example. But you can also have a large corporation that is going to segment the storage by departments, so engineering, HR, et cetera. But anyway, you can apply role-based access control for administrative access for those segments, and you can apply role-based access control for data access in those segments. So we can provide this further level of micro-segmentation, which is a zero trust principle. Okay, well, with that, let's get into user behavioral analytics, and we're going to use NetApp Cloud Insights, in particular Cloud Secure, to illustrate how this works. So I mentioned that the insider threat, a third of data breaches from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report are insider threats. And so what is an insider threat? The insider threat could be a malicious user like Edward Snowden, right? We all know who Snowden is, and he was a contractor for the NSA and exfiltrated data into WikiLeaks. And so that was toxic data to the NSA. It could be a compromised user. An insider could be a compromised user. So a compromised user is a user that became an insider threat unwittingly by clicking on, say, a phishing email link, and then they became infected with malware, and that malware can then traverse an organization, laterally traverse. Or an insider could be a careless user, and a careless user isn't inherently a careless person, but systems are complex that our users are using, and they can accidentally put data that is sensitive data in a place that could be exposed to the larger public. And so an insider, a person needs access to data to do their jobs, and we need to apply the principle of least privilege to minimize the access, but there is a certain amount of access to data. And so we need to determine, looking at the behaviors of users using FPolicy servers, in this case we're talking about Cloud Secure, to determine what's good versus bad, or normal versus abnormal. So with Cloud Secure, it makes use of unsupervised adaptive machine learning algorithms. It's using AI and ML. And so it's doing this to determine the normal versus abnormal. So it baselines what normal data access is, and from there it observes abnormal behavior and triggers. So if you were to attempt to do this with static definitions, they would constantly be out of date. So this is very powerful, this whole idea of AI ML for user behavioral analytics. So here's an example where we have alerts, and this is from Cloud Secure, part of Cloud Insights, where we have potential attacks, which are ransomware attacks that have been identified, and Cloud Secure can take a snapshot to minimize the damage from that ransomware attack. Or we can see increase in user data access activity, and we can kick out a warning, and we could possibly recommend quarantine of that particular user. And then double clicking on a particular alert, we can see that this user is copying files. So this could be the Edward Snowden example, or it could be the compromised user, where they're scanning files to get sensitive data, to exfiltrate that data, to monetize that data. The malicious actors are trying to make money. And then the insider, threat detection, you can identify the threat, and the system can recommend quarantine if necessary, before any data is breached. Then after events occur, Cloud Secure has a forensic capability, and all of our FPolicy ecosystem partners have these kinds of capabilities. And so we can see, after an event occurs, where were the spike of activity, what types of activity, and then what specific data was being accessed. So we can do after event analysis, forensic analysis. So specific to clouds, there's a shared responsibility model. And so there's this notion of in the cloud, or of the cloud versus in the cloud, right? So in the cloud is your problem. So it's your enterprise's problem to secure data in the cloud. So for infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, there's different levels of that being your responsibility. And then of the cloud, again, we see different levels of responsibility for the different as a service. So in a specific example, here's security responsibilities defined by AWS. And so this is an infrastructure as a service. And so we can see that the data, the users, the application, the OS, that's all the customer responsibility. And then AWS's responsibility is around the virtualization, the network, and the infrastructure and physical pieces of this. Okay, cloud compliance. is a data classification product. And cloud compliance, despite its name, can be used on-prem and in the cloud as well. And so it's a data protection compliance tool, and it helps you to govern your data. So in the example I showed in the beginning where GDPR fines and different privacy regulation fines can be administered, this allows you to identify where your sensitive data is. It can, it comes from multiple sources, so it doesn't doesn't necessarily have to be from NetApp products. It can come from many sources, and I'll get into what those are. And it uses AI to understand, what the data sources are. And so it categorizes the data. So, out of the box, it categorizes HR, financial, legal, support, services, many different categories of data. And you can customize your data categories for your industry that your organization is in. And again, it uses AI to understand each category and the content of that data. So how it works is you can see there's these different data sources, databases, S3, cloud volumes, ONTAP servers, etc. And so it goes into this AI engine of Cloud Secure, and it starts to categorize, classify, put metadata and identifiers around that particular data, and then the compliance policies are applied for the different types of regulations that you're beholden to, and these reports can be produced for the different regulations that your organization is beholden to. And so there's a dashboard, and so there's a compliance tab, and so you can look at these out of the box compliance rules. You can look at the risk overview, and it can do data subject access reports if data subjects, like say GDPR data subjects, want to see if their data is contained in an organization. Okay, so kind of jumping back into Zero Trust, let's take a look at what the ONTAP capabilities are in this regard. So we have what we call a blueprint for this data-centric microcore and perimeter with ONTAP. And so to achieve this, there's a certain number of steps you need to go through. So first thing is locating your data. And that would be using a tool like Cloud Compliance to understand where your data is. And then also using a tool like Cloud Compliance to classify that data, understand the sensitivity of that data. And if the data is sensitive, protecting that data using a Cloud Compliance, a tool like Cloud Compliance. And then we need to delete our extraneous data. Our extraneous data is a liability, whether it be sensitive data or not sensitive data. We do not want to have extraneous data around. So we have a capability called Secure Purge in ONTAP. If you're using NetApp volume encryption, that will crypto shred that extraneous data to ensure that it's been deleted. And then we want to control access to the data. And I talked about using secure multi-tenancy, which is use of storage virtual machines to segment that data and apply role-based access controls around that, and then observe the abnormal access patterns using FPolicy, the Zero Trust engine, and using our FPolicy partner ecosystem, including Cloud Secure, to understand these abnormal access patterns, the user behavioral analytics piece. And then apply multi-factor authentication for administrative access. And there was a time where this wasn't common, but this is a best practice today. And it's not only a best practice, but it's a requirement for DoD environments, and it's a requirement for PCI DSS environments. And so multi-factor authentication can be achieved using Security Assertion Markup Language, SAML 2.0 for web access to ONTAP, and also to ActiveIQ Unified Manager. And it can be done for CLI access, SSH CLI access, using chain two-factor authentication. And then we want to encrypt. We want to encrypt at rest and in flight. So we want to use NetApp volume encryption and NetApp aggregate encryption for data at rest encryption. We can also do hardware-based encryption with ONTAP using NetApp storage encryption, which are self-encrypting drives. And these are, both these mechanisms are FIPS 142 validated, so they're, the cryptographic modules are validated. And then we want to encrypt in flight. So we can encrypt using protocol-based encryption for SMB or NFS. We can use IPsec. Starting with ONTAP 9.8, we can use IPsec for protocol-based encryption, and we can use IPsec for iSCSI encryption as well. And then our replication encryption can also be encrypted. And we can encrypt our management plane, and we can, using TLS 1.2, and you can go into FIPS mode with TLS to make it, as secure as possible. And so we have our at-rest and in-flight encryption. And then finally, we need to monitor and log all access, administrative access as well as data access, so we can understand that and log that to a SIM like Splunk. So we've built this concept of trust into our digital systems. We now need to unwind it using zero trust. So you need to learn about the security controls of ONTAP to create this data-centric, segmentation gateway is, and this is another Forrester terminology, segmentation gateway, which is a set of controls, for zero trust, microcore, and perimeter. And then use user behavioral analytics and the ONTAP zero trust engine, which is the FPolicy partner ecosystem, FPolicy external servers. Know where your sensitive data is using cloud compliance. And remember to verify and never trust, because we never should have built the concept of trust into our digital systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Paul, as well for presenting. I mean, it really sounds like having that zero trust architecture, protecting your data from ransomware threats, and just having that ability to protect your data from end to end is extremely important in today's world. So I appreciate you guys presenting on that today. We're going to go ahead and open it up for some questions. And I actually had a couple come throughout the webinar. So we'll start with those. And if anybody wants to put any additional in the chat, we will make sure that Dan and Paul are able to get to them today. So one of the first questions that we actually have is regarding cloud volumes on tap. One of our attendees was asking, how do you monitor performance with cloud volumes on tap?
Yeah, I answered that in the chat, but basically Cloud Manager, the tool for managing cloud volumes on tap, will allow some basic monitoring of performance. And if you want detailed monitoring, you can go into Cloud Insights and get detailed monitoring.
Perfect. I mean, you might have also answered in the chat, but I don't know if everybody else can see it. One other question asked was, what type of encryption is used for cloud volumes on tap as well?
So Cloud Volumes on Tap supports NetApp volume as well as NVE and NAE is both supported. So the volume level encryption is supported, and then NAE extends that. They both use AES 256 for encryption.
Right, and you need to use an external key manager.
Yes.
With that.
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm talking over you there, Dan.
No, that's okay.
Perfect. And then actually somebody was asking about the Keystone solution. And Paul, I know you brought that up a little bit in what you covered, but somebody's asking, who owns the data assets with that Keystone solution?
So the Keystone solution is a subscription-based, consumption-based solution from NetApp. So they actually own the assets. So when I had that last slide on there that had a representation of the racks, those racks are owned by NetApp. And then you pay per drink, if you will, but you pay for usage of those racks. And then NetApp is responsible as well for updating them over time and ensuring that they meet an SLA that is agreed upon, which is what those tiered levels of services are. So Flash is a high-level SLA, Block is a lesser SLA, and then finally you have an object store for long-term storage.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. We have a few more questions here before we wrap up, and if there are not any additional in the chat, last few minutes to get those in. The next one, I know that containers is a hot topic right now. Somebody's asking, does Cloud Volumes ONTAP support containers? I don't know, Paul or Dan would like to take that one.
Yeah, it fully supports Kubernetes and microservices architectures.
Perfect. And then the last two that we had come through, somebody's asking about ransomware attacks. Is a ransomware attack an incident or a breach? They'd like to know.
Yeah, the ransomware attack is typically considered an incident because but we've seen with some of the more recent forms of ransomware, in particular a ransomware called Maze, it does both. It actually breaches the data and then it asks the victim for ransom because they actually create encrypt the user's data as well. And then the Maze ransomware people are quite evil. They collect the ransom and then they ask for more money because they've exfiltrated all the data, and now they're going to sell the data back to the victim. So it gets complicated, but typically it's an incident rather than a breach.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Paul. And I know it's a hot topic as well these days, and we're always seeing ransomware attacks in the news every day. Were you going to add something to that?
So Dan, Insights actually, I mean, ransomware is a big topic today. And, I think it's, from what I see here, it's built into these product offerings. I mean, from Insight monitoring encryption all the way through, read-only backups. That actually is a pretty good defense line to react to a ransomware attack. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, yeah, and different partners in our FPolicy partner ecosystem have capabilities like Cloud Insights, Cloud Secure takes snapshots to defend against ransomware when it realizes ransomware is at play. But another partner of ours has a product called CryptoSpike. That's ProLion is the partner, and CryptoSpike actually it quarantines the user who's committing the ransomware attack. And it also does recovery. So it finds a snapshot that is the most viable snapshot to recover from, and it extracts the infected data from the snapshot, and doesn't restore data that wasn't infected, which actually can be another data loss. So there's a lot of powerful capabilities with the different tools in the partner ecosystem.